Here we are now in Houdini, and what I want to do is, first of all, give you guys a little tour of this scene that I prepared ahead of time. I have the rune geometry, which right now is just a grid that I threw down. Here is what the render looks like. It's just this marble platform, and I literally just took the same shader that we used on Alfred. So it's just that marble material that you saw in the first part 1 of Houdini for the New Artist. By the way, if you haven't seen part 1 and you're new to Houdini, I would recommend checking that out because I'll go over a lot of the basics and how I create all this. But it's really just a pretty simple scene. We have the sun that's responsible for the light, and then we have our render cam. So we have all that, and what we want to do now is work on building this simulation, this particle simulation, to create the magical wispy effect that you saw earlier. Let's go into the rune, and I'm going to start off by using a node called attributes from map. And what this will do is it'll take a texture map that I specify. In this case, I'm going to go to our hip, and I've included this rune image. And we're going to add this rune image to mask off where the particles are going to occur. Now, right away, you'll notice that we don't have anything. As a matter of fact, it's kind of hard to see what's going on because of the light in our scene. So we can turn that off right here. We can do this little X light bulb. And now we can really see the color that is on this plane right now. And the reason why it's looking like this is just because we don't have very many points. So we're going to take our grid and let's go for right now just 500 and 500. And now, as you can see, we have our little rune showing up. Again, that's just an image map that I prepared inside of Photoshop to mask all this off. And the reason why we see our image like this is because the points are right now colored with this CD attribute that this attribute map has just defined. So if I zoom in here, you can see we have all of our points, and these points have our color. If we go to our geometry spreadsheet, you'll see that we have RGB, so our color exists in 3 values, just like that. And what we're going to do with this attribute from map is not only define our color, but eventually define other attributes that will control our simulation. And now that we have this, let's say that I want to bring it into a DOP network. So let's bring it into a DOP network and let's make some particles. Well, you can just type in DOP network and you can add that right there and attach it and double click, and this will get you inside of DOPs. You can also make DOP networks on the scene or the object level here. You can just type in DOP network and it will bring up the DOP right here as well. But I'm actually going to, for right now, make this DOP network inside of SOPs, just like I did with the first node that I laid down. And let's just name this particle sim. All right, so now that we're here, we mentioned in our last tutorial that we need an object to collect all of this information while we're inside of DOPs. So if I press tab, you'll notice that we have a section here for objects. We have objects, and here are all the available objects that we can use. Because we are working with particles, it makes sense to use this pop object right here. Again, pop stands for particle operator. And we're also going to need a particle solver. So we'll type in pop solver, just like that. Connect it here to the outputs, and the gray inputs on these DOP nodes will basically notate where the object should go. So we have our object that's going into the gray inputs. So we have pop object 1. Let's call this our grid plane. Let's just do that. And you might think, well, I have this grid plane and it says initial geometry, so you might think to just browse for the geometry and hit accept and we're good to go. Now we have something that's fed into the pop solver, and let's say, I don't know, we wanted to add a force of some kind to move these particles around. Let's say pop force, and let's attach our forces, which are like our additional seasonings, to this post solve here. And I'm going to use this noise. Let's just add some noise, and we can adjust this or whatever. If I press play, this is what we'll get. And the interesting thing is that it's all actually working as it should. We have our points that, again, are part of this mesh, and the pop solver is responsible for moving points. So the points are getting moved according to this noise that I just made over here. But it's not really what we want. We want actually particles scattering around, and we don't want the grid to actually change like this. So what do? Well, this is probably bound to be a somewhat of a source of confusion at first. We have our object, but it's actually commonplace, at least for this particle simulation here, to leave our object empty and to instead fill our object using a pop source node. Remember when we hovered over here and we saw that it says sources? Well, we actually typically use this pop source node to fill our pop object with the correct information to spawn particles. That's just a convention that you'll see not only for particle solvers, but you'll also see that for a lot of volume-based things down the road as well. Anyway, we have this pop source, and one of the first options that we have here is the SOP right here. So we can say, let's have our SOP, and we can browse for this attribute from map, which is our last node we used. And now we have a blue plane, which is because of our guide right here. And we have particles that are, as you can see, scattered onto the surface. And now if I go ahead and add let's say a pop force again, I add a pop force and I make a merge to merge the source and the force. The source and the force, that's kind of catchy. We can merge those together, and I can add a little bit of noise. And now if I press play, we have a particle simulation that's a bit along the lines that we're hoping for. Now I want to point something out that's really cool. Notice how some of these particles are colored white. Well, that's because when we specified our SOPs here in the pop source, and it grabbed the geometry from this portion of the SOP, it also took all of its attributes. And so when the pop source filled the grid plane object that we have right here, it brought the geometry, but it also took a look at the attributes, and that's why it knows how to color some of these points whites. That's how the solver knows what color these points are. And actually, if I look at my geometry spreadsheet now, for one, it's going to look a bit different because we're in DOPS, but I can go to this grid plane, which is our object, and I could say, within our object, go to the geometry that is contained within it, and you'll notice that we have our position and we have our color. And the color, again, comes from SOPs. So in addition to that, you'll notice that we have all of these other attributes that have been added. And that has all been added with the source node, which is a big reason why you would use a source. With the source node, we get things like the age, we get things like, we have this dead attribute if a particle dies, we have a particle ID, and all kinds of different things that the solver understands and that we can use within our simulation to give us interesting results. But again, the geometry came in, and all of these attributes that you see here were simply just attached after or while it was being imported here to the DOP simulation, which then again is in the solver, which we will eventually collect. So anyway, in the next lesson, we're going to take this further and continue on our little journey here.